training in intuition development and in how to stabilize the energies in their bodies.
Well, this ability to be intuitive, is it physical or is it coming from the subconscious? Is it coming from out there in the universe?
Yeah. Well, in a way, it's coming from both the higher dimensions and from the physical realm itself. But intuition is operative, let's say, when your mind comes into your body and centers inside the body in the present moment. So when the mind and body merge, then you become aware of the spirit. So in other words, intuition is a function of the way mind, body, and spirit all come together at the same time, and you have a total unity of awareness. So when that happens, and you can just get centered in yourself, let's say, the body will constantly be picking up, let's say, signals, from the field around you. That could be about whether you're safe or whether you're in danger or whether a house feels good to go in or not good to go in. And that is a kind of intuition. It starts off sort of as instinct.
Yeah.
And that rises up the spine and comes up into the brain through the old reptile brain first. And you get those fight or flight signals, I call that in my book the truth signal and anxiety signal. So when something's right for you, you get excited and it bubbles and it rises up and you get warm and you lean towards something. And when it's not right for you or when you hear a lie, you get contracted and it feels solid and heavy like a wet blanket's on top of you,
And still
But you know that instinctually, and that's a part of the lower brain. Now then it keeps rising up and it goes into the middle brain, which is where all the senses are. And that's where intuition starts to take on that sensory information of the vibration, the little voice in your head, the visions, the flashes of insight. Or even some people have a sense of smell. They'll smell certain scents that remind them of other people, and they'll know things from the way things smell.
Sure. Well, how about people who, like Grandma had a certain perfume she passes on, and people are convinced that they're smelling that perfume, months, years later in their room. They know that Grandma's visiting.
Absolutely.
Is that part of that?
That's part of it. Absolutely. Those are the inner senses, the subtle inner senses. And that's part of the way intuition makes itself known. It activates those inner senses. Now, whether you think you're smelling it or you're actually smelling it, in a certain way, your inner self doesn't know the difference.
And it doesn't really matter, does it?
It doesn't really matter, You're trying to get through to yourself to give yourself some information. So whatever works,
Absolutely.
Penny, and then it goes up beyond the middle brain, and it goes up into the upper brain, where it registers as sort of a meaning. It makes sense, and you go, aha. Oh, it's a such and such, and you label it.
There's nothing like that aha moment. Penny, we're going to be back with you in just a moment. This hour, we'll talk about her work, The Intuitive Way. Next hour, we'll talk about her new work, Frequency, right here on Coast to Coast AM. Okay, on Christmas Eve and Christmas night, we will have live programs for you. In addition to everything that we're going to be doing those 2 nights, I'd like you to send us some of your holiday stories. Producer Tom wants to preview them and maybe call and guarantee you a slot on the program, Christmas Eve or Christmas Day night, if you would. You know what it's like trying to get in on your own. So you can send a little email story. Make sure you've got some information, contact information in your email. Holiday Stories 1, that's the number 1 now, holidaystories1 at yahoo.com. Just send a little holiday story there. Tommy will look at it, and maybe we'll squeeze you in during our programs on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day night, right here on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. Penny Pierce, our guest tonight, Frequency in the Intuitive Way. In your opinion, what is intuition, Penny?
Well, to me, intuition is a kind of direct perception that occurs in the present moment without any need for logic or proof. It's kind of a perception where you know something all at once. And usually it's accurate in the moment.
But does it mean that there's something supernatural or something natural about it?
Well, to me, the supernatural is natural. It's just a higher frequency of our ordinary reality. And as I was saying before the break, some of the intuitive information rises up from the body, from things that are happening in ordinary everyday life. And you're getting information about what's safe and what isn't safe and what's right and what isn't right for you to do. But you also get a sort of a descending information that comes from the higher levels of your own self or from the world, in the higher dimensions of the world, which might be like your daughter's dream about 9/11, where it comes down through the upper part of the brain and drops down and finally registers in the body. And that may be a vision. It might be a dream, and so that comes in as well and needs to be grounded and made meaningful. So intuition rises and it descends. So I don't know if it's supernatural. I think we're all supernatural.
Have you found that people who tend to have these abilities are more spiritual than those who do not have the abilities?
I think that, some people open up in strange ways, sometimes suddenly, sometimes they have various psychic abilities. But I think that intuition is a broader thing than a single psychic ability, for instance. And that as you start working with opening yourself into a direct intuitive knowing, it almost always takes you into the spiritual realms. And it's not necessarily religious. It could be much more like mysticism, where you have direct connection with the Godhead or with nature or something. But I think that real true intuition always connects you with spirit.
You tend to be a little more telepathic if you're intuitive, I would think.
That would be one of the ways of receiving information, absolutely. You could be empathic, where your whole body kinesthetically receives impressions or patterns. And that's the way I work, is I just feel things. And it comes in all at once in one large complex pattern, and then it starts to decode itself sort of somehow inside of me, and I start to know how things are working. Sometimes I will hear something that would be more related to telepathy. And sometimes you get pictures, of course. All the senses can be used. So even sometimes you'll just get vibrations, literally. You'll get cold or get hot or, different kind of sensory impressions.
Give us a story, Penny, if you can, on some kind of intuition that just has stayed with you all your life. Not necessarily happened to you.
Yeah. Well, a lot of what has happened to me has come from visionary dreams. And, there's a lot being talked about around 2012 these days. And I had a visionary dream quite a few years ago, maybe 15, 20 years ago, where I was talking to a healer in my dream. And the man said to me, he'd been working on the East Coast, and he said, those suits, meaning the business people, are very solid, and meaning that their belief systems were very tight and it was hard to get through to them. And I said, yes, I know. And he looked over at me and said, well, you're right on schedule. And I looked down and my left arm was transparent.
Jeez.
And I thought, oh, that's right. We're supposed to learn how to become transparent. And then I remembered in the dream that we were coming up to this time period where something was going to happen that I'd been waiting for lifetimes. And it was going to be a huge event coming in maybe 25 years or so. So it would put it probably somewhere between 2012 and 2020. And then this dream revealed itself in stages. And the next stage was it's told me that this was called the void, the event. Mm-hmm. And that during this experience, we would have to become like the void in order to survive the void. And that meant transparent, holding nothing, being, no solid places within ourselves in terms of emotions or fixed beliefs, just being totally open and in the moment. And that what was likely to happen is that there would be something